Welcome to another edition of the official Colorado Sports Hall of Fame podcast. I'm co-host Dave Plati.
And I'm Jim Saccomano. We're your co hosts. Between us, we have 88 years of experience working in media relations in Colorado sports, myself with the Broncos, Dave with CU, and both of us with the Denver Bears. Remember them?
I'll never forget them. Most of our topics are going to center around sports history within and around the state, leading into the revealing of the state's top 150 moments heading into Colorado's sesquicentennial on August 1st, 2026. That's the date for Colorado's 150th birthday after being admitted to the Union as the 38th state in 1876. A select committee of state sport veterans, 9 of us in all with over 250 years involved in the state of Colorado sports, will be selecting those moments in the coming weeks. We're going to resume interviewing the remaining 3 inductees selected for the 2026 Colorado Sports Hall of Fame class next week. You can pull up the archive podcast with Cordell Stewart, Gigi Fernandez, and Steve Foley on the Colorado Sports Hall of Fame website. That's coloradosports.org. Click on the menu bar and then scroll down to podcasts. In the next few podcasts, we hope to catch up with the other 3 inductees, Harry Holland, Wendy Koenig, and Fat Lever. The 6 will be enshrined next April 16th at the Hilton City Center in downtown Denver.
We are planning to start that countdown the first week of January in 2026, 5 per week, with 1 per day come July for the top 10. We're planning to have an occasional guest or 2 from those moments as they relive them with us. Until we start the countdown, Dave at present has isolated over 1,800 moments in state history. We'll reference many of those prior to the countdown, and also we'll recognize an event or 2 on their anniversary dates. For example, a look back at some events from today, December 4th, in Colorado sports history.
So let's go back to 2012, and this was really cool because I was there, but 3 locals were inducted into the the College Football Hall of Fame ceremony at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City. Air Force safety Scott Thomas, Colorado guard John Wooten, and Colorado State safety Greg Myers. So to have 3 players inducted from the same state, the same induction ceremony was pretty rare. You know, and you're talking about Colorado, it was 1 from each of our Division I schools. Maybe it's happened in a state like Florida before, or another state that's had more than 3 schools, California or Texas, but that was a pretty special moment for Colorado. Thomas was the captain of the 85 Air Force team that produced its best record in history. The Falcons were 12-1 that year, and they polished off that season with a win over Texas in the Bluebonnet Bowl. Wooten was the 6th Buff selected for induction, was a member of CU's 856 team that won the 57 Orange Bowl over Clemson. He went on to have a 10-year professional career with the Cleveland Browns and 1 year with the Washington Redskins, but his greatest moment in the pros was he blocked for the great Jim Brown. Myers won the 95 Thorpe Award as the nation's top defensive back, leading the Rams to an 8-4 record and berth in the Holiday Bowl. So Thomas, Wooten, and Myers going in the same class back in 2012 on this date was pretty special.
That was a special moment, Dave. Less than 8 months after tragedy struck Columbine High School on April 20th, where 20 students and a teacher were killed in the worst school shooting in state history. This is December 4th, 1999. The Rebels defeated Cherry Creek on the Bruins' home field 21-14 to win the state's 5A football championship. Creek took an early 14-0 lead in the first quarter, but was shut out the rest of the way, with Columbine tying the game in the second and going ahead 2 plays into the fourth. The game was played with an overflow crowd of 8,000 plus, with the most media, local and national, covering the televised event to witness the Rebels win and finish with a 13-1 record. A very melancholy moment, but we deal with all kinds of things in sports.
And as I recall, that was pretty emotional for all involved, especially for the families of the 12 students that were killed and the teacher too. But the school rallied around everybody, and just to have something to celebrate that short afterward, you know, probably provided to the healing process.
I agree with that.
In my research, I've dug out some crazy stuff. Back in 1947, on December 4th, The Colorado College hockey team opened the season with an exhibition win over Nebraska Omaha. The score was 26-3 in a hockey game. Omaha was more or less considered an amateur team at the time, but the Tigers came back the next night against the same team and beat them 16-3, thus outscoring UNO 42-6 over 6 periods of hockey.
That's a lot of goals, David. On
I
December
think that
4th,
the goalie had to be nicknamed a Sieve.
December 4th, 1977, the Broncos clinched their first ever playoff berth with the 24-14 win over Houston and clinched their first division title 3 hours later after the Oakland Raiders fell 20-14 at the Los Angeles Rams. I can still remember Red Miller in the post-game saying, "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Oakland Raiders are in second place."
Who said that?
Red Miller.
If a coach did that today,
Yeah,
obviously it'd be
it's
all
a
over the
different
media.
time.
Yeah, but with only really newspapers and radio, TV, but they've probably got minimal coverage. But that would explode on Twitter. You'd have people criticizing left and right. I mean, I don't know what somebody saying that today would play out to. So
Fortunately, the statute of limitations is well past now.
within our podcast, we like to highlight some of our favorite "Did you know" moments from our backgrounds for the Broncos, Bears, and the Buffs, or the state in general. We're not always going to talk about the teams we work for.
No. When the Kansas City Kings selected Dave Logan in the ninth round, 143rd overall of the NBA draft, he became just the second athlete in history to this day to be drafted by MLB, NFL, and NBA teams, joining Dave Winfield. In the 72 MLB draft, the Cincinnati Reds selected him as a shortstop pitcher in the 30th round. Of course, at that time, if he had signed with the Reds, he couldn't have played in college. His scholarship would be invalid. So he didn't. And in the 76 NFL draft, the Cleveland Browns nabbed him in the third round, 65th overall. He chose the NFL. By the way, people don't realize this. John Elway was not on scholarship his junior and senior years at Stanford. Was not on scholarship.
Why?
Because he had signed with the New York Yankees, and it was that professional thing. He was not eligible to be a college scholarship guy anymore. So his deal with George Steinbrenner, he said, "Mr. Steinbrenner, will you pay my tuition?" And George Steinbrenner said yes, and paid his tuition his junior and senior years at Stanford.
Did not know that. But
No,
it makes sense because how the NCAA now with NIL money and everything that's going on with college sports, that never would have happened. And
right.
and the NCAA in its own infinite wisdom probably wouldn't be in this pickle today if back in 2004, Jeremy Bloom was playing football for us, but he was also an Olympic skier, and to fund his skiing training, he needed sponsors. Well, the NCAA always declined that opportunity for him. And that kind of led to what's happened recently with college sports with players getting paid and stuff. But I remember being at the final ruling in Boulder Court, and the judges sided with the NCAA, but they pointed at the three people there from the NCAA and said, I'm siding with the law here, but you people could have done the right thing. And I just remember the three people from the NCAA being so freaking smug about it. But Jeremy had to stop playing football and skied in the 4 Olympics. He wound up getting drafted and playing for a few years with Pittsburgh. And I think he was with the Broncos for a year or two, or at least tried out. Wasn't that true, Jim?
I think as a tryout, yes.
Yeah.
But so much for the smug. The NCAA, if you look in the dictionary under smug, there's a picture of the NCAA people.
Well, since I'm still partly part-time employed at CU, I'll bite my lip. But I'm in the book I'm writing, Platitudes of the book, clever title. I'm taking a few shots here and there. Not many, though, but there'll be some people in there probably not happy with me. And our executive producer, Tim Simmons, can chime in at any point with this story, but In the fall of 1979, the Chuck Fairbanks Coaches Show on Channel 2, KWGN TV, was hosted by none other than Stu Nahan. Now, Stu Nahan, why does that name ring a bell? Well, he, he was of Rocky and Fast Times at Ridgemont High movie fame. Most will remember that Robert Six, president of Continental Airlines, was a big donor to the CU program and best friends with athletic director Eddie Crowder. So to add to the pizzazz of hiring Fairbanks away from the New England Patriots, a story in its own right later down the road, trust me, the idea of flying in Nahan weekly to do the show came to be. Nahan had already done Rocky in 1976 and Rocky 2 in 1979 and would return for Rocky 3 in 1982. He did the first 2 years of Fairbanks' show before it was taken over by Channel 2 sports director Jim Conrad. Tim, would you like to chime in with any comments?
Really, it was a very interesting time in Boulder. There was just too many things swirling around, and all I remember was that was a tough one for Chuck in many ways.
I mean, I was a student. I don't even remember meeting Stu Nahan, but you had to deal with him, didn't you?
Well, the big thing was we had to, at that time try to send the box scores, over the telecopier to him and so forth. And whoever was doing the show, you get on the phone with him now and then and just say, hey, you can talk about this, talk about that. But you got to remember when Chuck came in, he was pretty private. You really didn't get into his inner circle like you did with other coaches, like Bill Blair, who was coaching basketball, or you had Herb Brown on the staff and everything. You could go into their office, sit down, talk to them. But Fairbanks was pretty well hidden from folks. You just never got close to him. And the one thing is, if he had a problem with you, he'd always say it to your face. He never talked behind your back. But he was just one tough guy to work with. And it just it's hard to explain to people what the circumstances around there. And I think we have it somewhat nowadays in college sports where coaches are more protected and they're not as open as they used to be.
Yeah, too bad, but that's how it is now.
I think we need to explain to people what a telecopier is.
Yeah, oh my God, Tim reached way back there. Well, the Broncos played the very first American Football League regular season game on Friday night, September 9th, 1960. Denver defeated the Boston Patriots 13-10 in Boston. I eventually did a paper at CU when I was getting a master's degree on that game. The Broncos were also the first AFL team to beat an NFL team, besting the Detroit Lions in a preseason game on August 5th, 1967, 13-7 in Denver. Detroit's Alex Karras boasted prior to the game that if the Lions lost, he'd walk back to Detroit. Of course, he didn't, but he did get kicked out of the game in the second quarter. And Chet Nelson, the Rocky Mountain News, the next day wrote that Karras must have wanted to get an early start on his walk back to Detroit, so he got kicked out. The Broncos also won their first regular season game against a former NFL team, 24-10 over Atlanta at Mile High Stadium on October 18th, 1970. Interestingly, in 1970, the Broncos first became a member of the NFL. And that's when the sellout streak began. So as members of the NFL, the Broncos have never had a non-sellout at home.
Jim, you talk about the game with Detroit. Dave Socher was a big Lions fan, the sports writer for the Capital Chieftain. And so he got tickets for that game, and I drove up with him, and that was that first pro game I ever saw, back in the day. And we were talking about walking home with Alex Karras. Of course, I went to Iowa, so I met him when I was at Iowa. And after the game, I told Dave, I said, "Are you going to walk back to Pueblo?"
I think we need to back up for a second here, going, what class would you write a paper on about a football game?
Well, it was one where you got to choose your topic, and it was great. I did a study of comparative sports coverage, and it was fascinating because the Rocky Mountain News and the Denver Post did not send writers to those games. They had special to the Denver Post, special to the Rocky Mountain News. And in one of the stories, in one of the papers, Gene Mingo returned a punt for the winning touchdown. And Mingo was referred to as Mingo, comma, the Broncos' fleet Negro running back, capital N in Negro. So this was another era. That's how they called, that's how they referred to Gene Mingo in that article. It was a heck of a deal, really.
Was the professor of that class Maldine's by chance?
I don't even remember who the professor was.
Well, Mal was the best journalism professor I ever had, and all I remember about his classes are the first time he wrote a paper, it came back with more red ink written on it, where your errors were, and the goal was by the end of the semester to have no red ink on it at all. And
Uh,
he was the same way. He let us be creative, and I remember writing a story about an anvil falling from the third story window. I was basically writing about a Bugs Bunny cartoon. He said, "This is the first time somebody ever submitted a paper about a cartoon. Even though you have some errors in it, I'm going to give you an A."
that reminds me, I got an A in a paper once in graduate school. I wrote a paper on Muhammad Ali, and I got an A, but Russ Shane, the professor who was in charge of it, wrote on the paper, obviously, you do not know how to spell Muhammad. I had spelled it incorrectly throughout the paper.
Russ went out to be the dean when I was in school.
Yeah, he
So,
was the dean when I finished as well.
so speaking of like celebrities, like to deal with like the Stu Nays of the world and who you were talking about, I remember Lee Corso. It was great to work with, but he was a little high maintenance because he would call you if you were a ranked team playing another ranked team. He would just start his notes on the Sunday morning after the Saturday games. And I think Lee was based in Florida, in Orlando, Florida. My phone would ring like at 5:30 in the morning, Colorado time. Dave Corso, hey, can you fax me some notes on your game against so and so this week?
Unbelievable.
And
Yeah.
I'm like groggy, Lee. It's 5:30 out here, So, well, can you get them to me this afternoon? It was a telecom, or it was a fax machine that is worked at a pencil company, was his real business. So just remember, anytime my phone rang at 5:30 in the morning on a Sunday, it was going to be Lee Corso asking for notes. 144 hours ahead of the game.
Oh, I remember when Andrea Kramer would come out to do a piece with the Broncos, and Andrea was a voracious reader, and you couldn't send her enough clippings. She wanted clipping after clipping after clipping. Anyway, I once told her, I said, Andrea, you know my favorite part of your visits with us, and we were pretty close at that time. And she said, no, what? And I said, bye bye, Andrea. See you. Thanks for coming. Bye. It was when they walked out the door.
Oh, that's funny. So, yeah, my other challenge always was the until risk management wouldn't allow it anymore. The sideline guy, whoever was assigned to the game, and I run out with Ralphie. Oh God, let me work with the handler, with the trainer, and for the most part, they would oblige. You're not going to hold the reins. You can run by the side of them, but we're not going to let you hold the reins because at that point you can get dragged, you can fall over. And then risk management, like in 1997, said you got to stop this. Somebody gets hurt, we can get sued. And I was like, well, what if we had them sign a waiver? And they didn't want any bit of that. But, I mean, Adrian Carson did it. Jack Arute did it. I'm not sure if John Dockery ever did it. But, it was kind of funny to see those guys. Another guy from Fox, Dave Benz, not Dave Benz, but they had a guy do it too. I think four different guys over the course of time when I was SID had their sideline guys run with Ralphie. So,
Well, I'll tell you what, you don't want to get ahead of him and then trip and fall.
no. So, but the one thing I loved about Ralphie was the Brian Bosworth, who was kind of a comedian, a ham, loudmouth, whatever you wanted to call him.
Right, right.
He walked out and he was going to pretend to block Ralphie, and so Ralphie made her turn, was running straight at him, and all of a sudden he realized this isn't a German Shepherd, this is a 1,200-pound thing running right at him, and he bailed. And I don't know if I've ever heard the stadium laugh in unison, but
Mm-hmm.
you can hear everybody laughing. You hear people cheering, but I remember a distinct laughter because he looked like a fool.
Not uncommon among those guys. We could never say it in our heyday, but boy, that we dealt with a few of them.
True. So my last little note here is nearing the end of his spectacular NFL career. Cliff Branch still had his speed. Back on October 2nd, 1983, Raiders quarterback Jim Plunkett hit him with a pass at the 35-yard line, and he sprinted downfield for a 99-yard touchdown in Washington, D.C. against the Redskins. To this day, that's one of just 13 of that distance in NFL history. And Cliff at that time was probably 33 or 34 years old. And, I think we're all excited when you're watching a game and the ball's on the 1 yard line. And you're like, do we see a 99-yard run or a 99-yard
Yeah.
pass? And the number of times it's happened is minimal. And even a 99-yard drive is rare. We've had 8 99-yard drives in CU football history. And I'm not sure how many the Broncos have had, but 99 yards of anything are pretty rare. So when you're hoping to see, let's see a 99-yard run, it'll be kind of cool.
I think Plunkett, by the way, ought to be in the Hall of Fame along with Branch. Plunkett was a great player, and he was a little like Eli Manning. Eli Manning is going to go in because he's played in New York City. I enjoyed telling the writers when they'd say, "Oh, you win two Super Bowls as a quarterback, you got to go in." And I've said, "Yeah, unless you're Hispanic, right?" Well, what do you mean? Jim Plunkett, I said. Jim Plunkett. Oh, I got to go. They run like heck from that fact, but you got to be in the Hall of Fame.
Well, Cliff finally went in 3 years ago.
Right.
And, he's our first buff in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And there should be a few others. John Wooten comes to mind immediately with what he did before and after his career. But, you know more about what goes into those selections, the politics that it played. Getting Randy Gradishar in took forever. Like, why don't you shed a little light on what you know and how that process really works behind the scenes?
There's a lot of politicking involved, and I don't like it at all. One thing in baseball, it's all done by a vote by mail. In football, they have to show up. And I can remember, I'm not in the room, but you have spies and so forth. And Art Modell isn't in because the Cleveland guy begged his fellow voters to vote against Art Modell, which I thought was really, really wrong because he moved the team to Baltimore. And that's just wrong. And uh, Randy had great statistics, but you fall in the cracks, and sometimes you don't crawl out. And it was unbelievable, and you can't tell those guys anything because they think they're so smart. No offense, but they do. You can't tell them anything. And after a while, I think Randy Gradishar, they were shamed that they never voted for him, and he got such a national following that they had to put him in. And fortunately, that finally happened. But yeah, I don't care for the whole situation where they got to vote. And personally, I think not enough guys are in halls of fame. I think more guys should be in, including the Buffs and all kinds of people. If you're one of the greats, you're one of the greats. Period.
Yeah, and even the College Football Hall of Fame, they've got certain rules. And, for a coach to get in, you have to have a 60% winning percentage and probably win a few championships or at least one. And there's been a movement by a lot of people back in Indiana to get Bill Mallory in. He's just shy of 60%.
Sonny Lubick is a percentage point away.
Yeah, and Eddie Crowder uh, came close. He was like at 585. And I made a pitch once. Well, what about a coach that takes over a program that was on probation and he's got to rebuild it? And Eddie had 2-8 teams when he started. And then after that, he had a winning record. He won 63 games. I want to say 67 or 63 games offhand. Yeah, but 67 games, 67-49. But after you take away the first 2 years, 2-8, you take away 4-16. Now he's 63-35. More, right there he qualifies. So, but they don't make that exception. And then with players, you have to be a first team All-American, might one of 5 recognized services. And I've tried to make a pitch that option quarterbacks really going to have they're going to have a tough time being first team All American because they don't have the passing yards, which I think most of the media look at when they select All Americans. So you've got great option quarterbacks like Darian Hagan, Jamel Holloway at Oklahoma, Cordell Stewart, that don't qualify for the College Football Hall of Fame because they weren't first team All Americans. They were all second team All Americans. And in Darian's case, he was a first team All American, but they don't recognize the Sporting News as a selector. So those guys will never get in the Hall of Fame. When you look at them, they're really deserving, but they're staunch in what they have to stand by. And I understand it because you can't start wavering, and then you get a lot of people on the borderline want to get in. But I think option quarterbacks really need to be looked at differently for the College Hall. So
Yeah,
anyway,
but
we went off tangent there a little bit, but that's what we enjoy doing.
that's right. That's right. Speaking of halls of fame and so forth, when the SID at Alabama, oh dear, who was the head coach? Ray Perkins, I think. Was he at Alabama once?
Yes.
Okay. The SID at Alabama, who's now the SID for Fellowship of Christian Athletes, on a cold and dark night or whatever, he decided to look up all-time national championships. And as you know, Dave, it's only been recently that you played for the national title. It used to be that it was voting, voting for polls. Anyway, the guy looked at every poll that there was that listed Alabama number one, and some of them were only like you said, the Sporting News had Alabama number one. Well, he considered it a national championship. So the next year, Alabama has like 11 national titles. Whatever, I'm making up the figure, but a lot of national titles based on the fact that he just awarded himself.
And a lot of those were before the AP's first one was in 1936.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I've seen that list. A lot of them are from 1914 or 1923 because a newspaper claimed that they were the best team in America. So they went with that. And, more credit to them for doing it. But, back then, teams from the West got very little respect across the board. And, Colorado, we had some good teams out here. Utah had some good teams, but they never got any national love. Occasionally, a team from California might get noticed, but even they were struggling to get the attention because back then, so many awards in college football were based on either the Ivy League teams, Yale in particular, and Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
And not even the teams from the South would penetrate that clique or whatever you want to call it. So finally, when AP came along in 1936, started more of a national poll. And we made that poll in the second year. We were number 16, thanks to Byron Whizzer White. So we were ranked pretty early on. But yeah, going back in history and looking at old newspaper clippings and stuff like that, it's kind of perplexing to see that the West was pretty much ignored until probably the 1950s or 60s.
Well, once upon a time, I was complaining nicely, but I was complaining to Bob Oates, the late Bob Oates, great sports writer for the LA Times. And I was complaining about Floyd Little being in the Hall of Fame. He said, "Well, you got no voters, Jimmy." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Well, there's one per team. And so west of the Mississippi, there's only 11 voters out of the 40 some guys." And I said, "What?" And of course,
Mm.
that's accurate. So when you get to the Seattle Seahawks, the Arizona Cardinals, and the Denver Broncos, it is really tough because they start off life with one vote, and they've got to convince like the Eastern voters who put Harry Carson in as a middle linebacker ahead of Randy Gradishar. Please, please, But a lot of people could see those East Coast games without ever getting on an airplane. There are 6 teams you could see regularly just by taking a train.
Yeah, well, the voting has always been stacked in certain things, and I won't. But you know what? Voting gets stacked, and they that's how it came down. So, but
Sure, that's right.
you know, but you're right when you point out when you only have one voter per spin. I'm not sure if that's how it works with Major League Baseball with those Hall of Fames, if it's representative of the areas they're in. But it seems to me that if you go national, across board national, where do people figure in that don't have a team in their area? Do they even have votes in these things, even though they may cover the sport? So,
Right.
well, anyway, we hope you're enjoying our podcast. Keep spreading the word. We want to thank our sponsors, Pasta J's of Boulder, 10th and Pearl, just west of the Pearl Street Mall. The late Bill Walton's favorite Boulder Eatery, and Colorado Collegiate Chronicle, an in-depth weekly look at college sports around the state, published by our special guest interrupter today, Tim Simmons, another veteran state PR man.
As always, we look forward to you tuning in weekly to enjoy our reminiscing with our Colorado Sports Hall of Fame guests, as well as our trips back into the state's sports history. Memory Lane. Thank you, folks.